Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today I'm going to be reviewing some more tracks from an act named Testimony of Apocalypse. And if we switch over to here, we're going to be checking out 3 songs from this act today. Starting with When We Were Dead. Now this is all in advance of their upcoming album titled The Offering, which is going to be released on the 27th of October this year. I enjoyed my last outing with them, my last time reviewing some of their previous work, so I'm looking forward to hearing some more, and we're going to listen to each of these tracks from start to finish. And we're going to hear what we think. Let's go! Instantly so heavy, man. When We Were Dead.
We were dead, innocent, and cannot cosmoses. In shadows of darkness, we dream with violent days. When we were dead. When we were dead.
There's such a huge amount of variety to the performance already, from the various different guitar riffs to the different patterns on the drum switching out the time signatures there. The vocals cutting through the mix nicely as well with a bit of vocal fry. Great use of the hook line there and with the rest of the instruments. And see, it's nice to have the guitar on that left side there. You don't always get that attention to detail with the panning, switching up the way instruments are portrayed here, but we have that. It's great. Great use in the bass and drums. Great use of almost a chromatic scale here. What is chromaticism? Great use of octave shifts there as well. Really great twisted, demented tone to the use of the tremolo bar as well with that solo there with some of those shifts there. It was a wonderfully voiced solo. Very unnerving. Suits the rest of the vibe well. When we were dead, we will fight? Okay, I'm gonna level with you guys here real quick. I'm not really sure if I got the words through clearly in this one. I really appreciated the vast majority of it. And even the vocals sounded cool, don't get me wrong. Like, there was a lot of variety of different guitar grooves. I appreciate how tight the rhythm guitars were with the different palm muted bits, and the lead guitar in that solo section was divine. Stood out really nicely. The bass line when it came in with the wow and going back into it was really nice and tight as well. And highlighted the root notes really neatly. And I think, again, there's a lot of diversity to the different drum fills and grooves we had there. I think that it was really fun to listen to, especially going between halftime and normal time, etc., with some of those shifts there and with the changes in time signatures. I'm just not sure if I got all the words through clearly. Just what I do think, though, with the parts I did get, when we were alive and we were dead, it's basically looking at our existences, both past and present, maybe talking about the concept of rebirth or something like that. We will fight. It's basically talking about, you know, like maybe I may have misheard something like the keys to the grave or something like that. It's talking about even if they're in that place, they will continue to fight for what they believe in. That's my interpretation of it. It's nice and powerful as well. So I don't think it's a song that's mourning their loss of their life. I think it's more a battle cry, letting them know that even in death, they'll continue to soldier on. I could be wrong though, but that's my take on it. And then we got Ghost, track number 2. Scintillating low drop tune grooves there, man. Really tight string lines. I want to give an instant shout out to the clarity of the vocals in this mix. I can just hear the words better now regardless of whether or not it's those clean harmonies, which sound wonderful. Wasn't initially sold in the first half, but they hooked me in the second. But even kind of like the growly raspy bits in the first half of the verse, those words like the spirit of salvation coursing through me, etc. I could hear that clearly, and it was really scintillating. Excellent. Lead me to you. I want to interrupt it here to talk about that guitar solo. I teach guitar to people, I do lessons, and I recently was working with a recording client. This is related, don't worry, but I find that some guitarists just don't really know how to phrase solos, and like when I started playing guitar, I tried to play 1 billion notes a second, and you gotta really do what this lead guitarist does in Testimony of Apocalypse. They actually try and phrase it like a lead voicing. There's flair to it. There is a steadiness with the note choices. And we have movements and adjustments in the intensity levels as well. Like we can clearly shred as per the last half of that. But there's also a quiet confidence to like the big vibratos that we had there, those intricate little legato kind of bits. It's really great use of that real estate there. It's really tight with the backing in general, like the rhythm guitars, the bass, the drums, but the lead is the icing on the cake. It's a nice change from the vocal parts, with the wide variety of different styles we've had there. And we'll go back a little bit so we can hear these clean parts with the interesting sort of guitar tones with the dustiness and the overdrive there, like a tiny bit with these. There's a lot. I think this is my favorite song out of the two, but I just want to give a shout out to that solo. It was a wonderful guitar solo, and I think a lot of guitarists who maybe don't have as much variety in their solos can learn from this. Oh, space solo in there? Great use of organ there as well, I think. Oh, they switched it up. Nice. Dude, that was sensational, and it was in 3 minutes as well. It's really a great example of what we can fit into a shorter time frame. I am thoroughly stoked with the music that's been put forward today. I personally feel, just in regards to the post-production, by the clarity of the vocals alone, because I think the guy is a competent singer. He's good within the genre. I think there's just a little bit of fuzziness in the first track that wasn't as apparent here. It was easier to discern the words here, and I'm appreciative of that. Because I like the imagery and the stuff we're talking about in that interlude section with the cleans as well as the choruses, and in the verse parts there. It's like, how do I describe what I think the story is about? I think we are talking about the whole person that, like, dying for the sake of coming back and being reborn, and like the power behind that, and that salvation that's coursing through the singer's veins. Truth be told, I'm not super duper knowledgeable about the faith-based stuff. I maintain a unintentional ignorance about it, but I nonetheless appreciate the storytelling that's involved here, and that's not in a derogatory way. I think that, I can appreciate it. The art of telling a story is important, whatever your belief system, and I think they smashed it here. They're clearly passionate about it. The passion comes through in the music as well as in the vocal performance, and there's a lot of change and adjustment and different twists and turns within these compositions that makes them thoroughly intoxicating and addicting to listen to. I don't think there was a single note out of place within this performance. I loved, again, the changes in the different amount of beats per bar and phrasings within the chorus. It was a lot different to a lot of the kind of rock and metal that I hear, where there's just 4 groups of 4, and that can often be a bit of a drag because it's predictable, but that isn't the case with Ghost, and it isn't the case with Testimony of Apocalypse. They know what they're doing, and it's very clever. Now, as I understand it, the final track for release that we're going to be checking out today is Dead Man Walking. This is their the 3rd track of this review. I've reviewed We All Shall Rise and Blessed Are the Dead before, so I'm familiar with what Testimony of Apocalypse are all about, but I also want to give a shout out to the fact that, again, their next album is coming out on October the 27th, and if you're a fan of the music that you're hearing today, please do go show us some support and put that on your wait list. Well, put it on your calendar, but anyways. Listen through this track now, Dead Man Walking. Let's go. It's ferocious, dude. Great pitch up on it, dude. Like, I'm no longer a dead man walking. There is such a phenomenal amount of power to that chorus line. I want you guys, if you're not already doing this, to listen to this through headphones, because there is just a huge amount of power, not just because of the quality of the post-production, but also because of how things are notched in regards to the arrangement, the choices of the different chords, bass lines, drum grooves. That the vocals being on top as well was a smart decision there, pitch-wise, because they probably knew that there just would not have been maybe enough room to have that mid-range growly stuff going on there. So I think that was really well calculated.
Stripes and die for me. That's how
changing vocal phrasing. Fantastic filtering. I'm floored, man. That took me by surprise. He gave love to us all, our Savior. I'm no longer a dead man walking. That gratitude expressed there in that chorus with a bit of force behind that last line where we're grateful, but also like we're just totally pumped up for what we're doing with the storytelling, with the vocal performance there. Just that solo section is one of the hands down best lead sections I've heard in the entirety of my time doing reviews. That there was just something truly mystical about it. It was like the combination of the chemistry between the various band members and the guitarist, the way they didn't just go constant the whole time, they had variations, a shift there. This is not just a good song, it's a great one. This is really special, and they got it under 4 minutes. I mean, I'm stunned by that. I think it's a phenomenal track, and I think these guys are a phenomenal band. And welcome to my review of these tracks from an act named Testimony of Apocalypse. We have been spoiled today. You know, what do I think these tracks are about? Well, it's about their faith, about their belief in God, the resurrection, their salvation, themes of being sort of grateful for the fact that we're not dead man walking, showing thankfulness for the grace and the support in our lives, and a lot of other things that I think I've missed the nuance on, but I'll probably want to listen back to as we go along. Because, look, if I'm honest with you guys, I would say this is some of the best music in this genre that I've reviewed in a very, very long time. There is just something utterly incredible about the way that they did this stuff, and I'm going to point that out within the conclusion. I hope to communicate that, but I just want to say off the bat, this is going to probably be a positive one, and if you disagree with that, well, you're wrong. But anyway, anyways, off to a great start getting combative with a potential audience. But look, let's talk about I've spoken about what I think the tracks are about individually, so we'll move on past the stories to the vocal performances. And the first track, I wasn't initially super duper sure about it, because, well, the first track, of course, being When We Were Dead, I wasn't sure about having the track with only the growlies, because I couldn't hear all the words clearly, and parts that I did get were there, definitely, I could feel that, but I feel like I missed out on some context as well. That's the only mild critique I have there, and then again, that just comes with the territory of the style of vocals we're doing, you know, with the growls and shrieks and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean I think they did a bad job, because there are other tracks as well where I could hear it more clearly. So I think it was just changes in the way that we expressed ourselves, slightly different techniques, etc. And I'm grateful that I did hear the stories that were told, because the stories were interesting and engaging, and the variety of different ways we spoke or sung or kind of communicated with the audience was excellent. The middle track there, Ghost, had a fantastic vocal harmonies there with lovely bits of vibrato there, and interesting phrasing to the stanza there, especially with the hook section where we messed around with different time signatures and moved some beats and then added others in different bars. And it was unpredictable, but at the same time it was satisfying, because we had moments where it was consistent and then where it wasn't. So there was that change there where we got to a kind of a new place, and then we came back somewhere more familiar. But then that familiar thing was the unusually phrased part. So it's just really kind of impressive because of that. We managed to normalize that amount of change within a composition, where nowadays a lot of bands and artists and musicians are simply just kind of concerned that if they do something too different, it'll be too much for the listener, when in fact that's just it's not real. You know, if you listen to music from the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, including into the 90s and stuff like that. In fact, if you just look at any music at a wider scale, there's still a lot of complex music where it's just thoroughly, it's wonderful, including this. I just think a lot of people overthink it. You know, there's merits to be made on having music that is reasonably easy to access, but it's about finding a midpoint, an equilibrium. And when you're going to release an album, you have the ability to be able to make a longer form concept where you can have that amount of variety in there without alienating people, especially if they're fans of your work in both areas. And I don't see why you wouldn't be a fan of Testimony of Apocalypse with theirs. But I think the vocals were great. We had great technique with the various bits we were trying to do there. We had a fantastic chemistry with the rest of the musicians within the band, and all in all, it was very satisfying to hear it. I think the way we communicated with the passionate performance alongside the aggression there when appropriate was wonderful. It suited both the texture and timbre of the various instruments within the accompaniment, but it also made sense with what the intensity of what the emotional kind of gravitas of what we were talking about, and it's cool. But, you know, with the vocals and the story considered, we have the actual track itself in regards to a good old structuring and length of tracks and the instruments within it. Now, the song was mostly guitar, bass, drums, vocals, with a bit of organ or maybe some other bits now and then as sub-layers, and that's all we really needed. I don't think we needed more than that. I think it's been a tried and tested formula for the last 100 years. You don't need to necessarily switch it up too much at this point to make it good or great. I think it's how you play those instruments and how you phrase them and how you present them that matters, as well as how they sound. And I'm going to go on the record to state that I loved how each of the instruments sounded. I thought the post-production was great, but it was also the way we played them and composed the various bits for them. And I'm going to basically say off the bat that I think that having these tracks with the traditional verse chorus with some bridges intertwined, but also lots of instrumental sections, was the absolute right thing to do. We did tell stories, but we could also play our instruments. We could shred. We had a lot of, we had some how do I describe it? Like what were going on with the drums there, with the use of the double kicks there, the interesting changes with the 16th and triplet sort of fills and like kick patterns, and the knowing when to kind of slow down and when to come back up, when to sort of step away completely and allow like the acoustics and like the vocals to go through, like in Ghost, knowing when to like just have a consistency with the like when we're Dead Man Walking. It's just, there's a nuance there that is something that you only come to when you've really spent some time either in a band or you've been basically it's at commercial grade level for the genre. I think that they've actually got a career and a future if they stick at it, without a shadow of a doubt. Like, the quality is there. It's really positive, and I think that just with the grooves on the drums alone, with how appropriate they were for like the way that the vocals were phrased, the rhythmic unison with that was tremendous. But also the bass guitar was relatively subtle in this. But there were a few key points where I really appreciated. Like when we were dead, the bass didn't really show itself until maybe a little bit in. When it went whom, it was almost like a best friend you hadn't seen in a while. and you automatically became accustomed to it, and it just blended in and melded in really neatly. It's like we knew that we had a bit of craziness with the other instruments there, so we knew to kind of tone it down a little bit, maybe with the virtuosity of the bass parts. And I mean that genuinely, because there was some wonderful bass soloing and like the interlude part, I think, of Ghost to there, where like we really explored the fretboard nicely, went into our mid-range there, and we were not afraid to play around with the listener's expectations, of the point where a lot of the time I think the bass guitar, you know, again being a bassist myself, a lot of the time the bass is there just to kind of fill in the lower register, right? But it's always good, especially when we've got space, we've got the double-tracked acoustics or clean guitars, etc., to be able to let that bass kind of flow in the mix, especially if it's still not in the same exact range as the vocals. There's room for it, and we made the most of that. When you went to sort of pick it up and went to kind of slam it down, and it was tight. The guitars, for me, were probably one of my favorites, though. I mean, that solo of Dead Man Walking was just absurd. What journey they've been on as musicians to be able to make a bridge or like a solo section that tight. But that was up there, again, with some of the best stuff I've heard from musicians I've reviewed over the last 3 years. It wasn't just the rhythm riffs. I wasn't just use the power chords, arpeggiating between these really interesting kind of crispy, distorted kind of like single string bits. The shredding and the phrasing and other parts of the songs were great as well. But that solo section for Dead Man Walking was something. It was a completely different animal, and it was just so cool because it wasn't like crazy sort of speed quick or wild or completely awe-inspiring because of the difficulty of it. It was that there were just these wonderful note choices there where the rhythm of it was almost inspiring, and it was so special because the rest of the band was so respectful of that. You had them let the lead have their moment in the sun, and then they came in to support, and then they intermingled and kind of danced with one another in a way that was very, very beautiful, and you don't get that often. That is the difference between, I think, a good solo section and a great solo section, is when you not only have a musician at the lead who can take over from the vocals and present themselves in a way where it's not an ego project or it isn't pretentious, it adds to the experience. But then you also have the other musicians come in to support them as well, perform that role there to kind of make it one big happy family's worth of just musical awesomeness, and we had that here. I can't fault it. It's actually, yeah, I can't say often that I'm surprised or that I am blown away by it, but that struck me, and you'll see that I didn't really do much during that period because I was just processing it. It probably seems like I'm simping a bit. I'm not. That's genuinely how I feel about it. And again, if people are not entirely satisfied with my thoughts on it, I challenge you to give me reasons otherwise why it's not the case. But moving on from that, the performances were phenomenal. They were wonderful. The themes there were typically... They never became too dire and too awful. There was a wonderful amount of energy to it. We were constantly kind of pushing against the grain there, kind of like adding sort of like a lot of force behind it. Not in a way where we were trying to overwhelm the listener, but it was like we were strong and bold and full of courage, and we were proud, and we were wanting to tell the listener that in a way that was respectful to the genre that we were performing in, and also just backed up like the strength in our beliefs that we had. And I think that came through very authentically with like the wide variety of ideas we had within this tracks. There were explorations there thematically as well as harmonically and performatively, and we just never had a dull moment. I think the motif in that respect fit well with the vocals and the story, and things were well connected. And I think that finally the studio recording, mixing and mastering, aside from the comments I've said where I wasn't necessarily sure if the vocals were always as present as they needed to be, everything else was flawless. I'm thoroughly stoked with how the guitars, bass, drums, and everything else are balanced in the mix. Nice one, a stereo feel with lots to kind of entertain the listener and get them to sort of play with. The things were nicely notched in the frequency spectrum, no resonant frequencies, and leveling in general was really dope. I think that, you know, there was dynamic range there. It was more than sufficient, and it was just felt so alive. It was a live performance, and just the amount of power within that chorus of Dead Man Walking was just huge. There was just something sort of like larger than life about it. it was just massive in these headphones. Whoever did the mastering on the stuff needs a pay rise, and they deserve they deserve some love because they did a tremendous job too. I've got nothing but love for it. Nice and low without pumping, so you know, bus compression limiting sorted. And this is my review of these tracks from Testimony of Apocalypse, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via the various social medias and the YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.